One of my favorite quotes is one that you may be familiar with by Hans Christian Andersen. When words fail, music speaks. The language of music is both beautiful and universal. It speaks to people, entertains people, comforts people, and teaches people in different ways through different songs at different times in life. I know I have found this to be true. Have you ever been in a situation where you couldn't find the words to express yourself? Like no matter how hard you tried, the words just wouldn't come. But then maybe you came across a song or even just a tune that somehow conveyed everything your heart was feeling. I know I have. And this song tonight is one of those for me. In 2011, I was introduced to this song by a woman that I taught with in McKinney. She gave me a CD with Jesus Draw Me Ever Nearer on it. And I remember thinking it was really beautiful at the time when I heard it. But I had no idea then how incredibly meaningful it would become to me in the years to come. When Dustin and I got married in 2008, we were young and naive, and we had a plan, a great plan, I might say, for how we wanted things to go. And if you know me well, I think it could be said that if I'm anything, I'm a great planner. The only problem with that is that life doesn't always turn out the way that you plan for it to go. 5 years into marriage, we decided we were ready to grow our family. What at first seemed to be going well quickly changed course, and we faced our first major derailment. In November of 2013, I went in for a sonogram appointment where I was about 8 weeks pregnant, only to find out that there was no longer a heartbeat. Our emotions went from joy to grief as we left that appointment. Instead of celebrating, I was scheduled for a D&C a few days later. And we grieved that loss privately. I actually don't know if I've ever showed anyone this picture before. And looking back, I wish I had walked through that time really differently. And if I had it to do differently, I would. But as they say, hindsight is 2020. A few months after our miscarriage, we were still hopeful that God would grow our family very soon, and we could continue with our happy, perfectly mapped out plan, because I love a good plan. That didn't happen. The next 5 years were filled with doctor's appointments, fertility treatments, surgeries, acupuncture, you name it, I tried it. And still nothing. All the while, as we continued to struggle, our siblings and our friends made pregnancy announcement after pregnancy announcement. Those announcements were obviously blessings, but I would be lying if I said that it wasn't extremely hard walking through this valley, watching God fulfill the desires of my heart and everyone around me. And it happened over and over and over and over. Then 2018 came, and over the course of our long journey, this was one of the hardest and most heartbreaking years. In the span of about 2 months, Dustin's parents' marriage of 40 years ended. I was diagnosed with lupus, and subsequently, because of that diagnosis, I was told that it was no longer wise for us to try to continue to get pregnant. This lupus diagnosis came after months of medical testing and lab work, trying to figure out the reason for some obscure symptoms that I was having. And in that short time span, we experienced a health crisis, the death of a marriage, and the death of a dream. To say we were crushed is a huge understatement. Days after my diagnosis, as I had to then schedule more doctor's appointments and go pick up new medications, I vividly remember sitting on our couch and basically staring at the wall of our living room for about 3 days. There was so much grief in such a short amount of time, and my brain was just having a really hard time processing it all. God said through the prophet Isaiah, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." While we walked through this season of life, we were feeling the fire. And many times, we felt like we were drowning. In the thick of it all, it was hard to know that God was with us. He promises to be, but it's not always easy to feel it. I'm sure you can relate to that. Though our feelings are important, they can sometimes lead us astray. Sometimes you have to put aside what you feel about God in the moment and remind yourself what you know about God. Toward the end of 2018, we decided to take a step of faith in a new direction. One that had never been on our radar before, and one that certainly was not a part of our original perfect plan. We made the decision to pursue adoption. We knew we wanted children, and we knew that there were children out there who needed someone. So filled with lots of anxiety and questions, we attended an information meeting through Christian Works about how to begin the adoption process. After 5 years of unexplained infertility, as if to add insult to injury, both women giving the adoption orientation were pregnant. I remember going in the bathroom during our first break and crying. They went over in great detail how they would be coming in our house regularly to inspect it, to look at our closets, to see if we had food in our refrigerator, to see if our toilets flushed, to make sure our medicines were locked up correctly, and the list went on and on and on. Sitting there hearing all the ways that we would be invasively scrutinized on a regular basis, and knowing that these two pregnant women telling us all about these policies that we would have to go through, and know that they didn't have to go through them, that was a really hard pill for me to swallow. However, we pressed on and spent the next several months completing paperwork, getting fingerprinted, going through a psychological evaluation, among many other things. Fast forward to 2020, the year of COVID. In August of that year, we were matched with a birth mother for an adoption that was planned to take place in November. We spent those 3 months leading up to the birth, getting our nursery ready, buying things that we would need, washing baby clothes in Drift, and installing a car seat in our car. The birth mother that we were matched with wanted us to be at the hospital when the baby was born, and she wanted me to be the first to hold her. So that's what we did. We roomed in at Methodist Dallas, and we waited for her to be born. As soon as she was born, both Dustin and I got to see her, hold her, and spend time doing skin to skin with her. It was amazing. And it was an experience I thought I would never get to have when that door was closed on us 2 years prior, the option of having biological children. We spent 24 hours naming her, holding her, feeding her, and loving her. And at about the 24-hour mark of the 48 hours that you have to wait before you can sign paperwork, her birth mother started to waffle. She had asked to see the baby a couple of times during the first 24 hours. Excuse me. So it wasn't odd that around dinner time she asked to see her again. We took that opportunity to go eat dinner, and we came back to our room and we waited. I don't really remember exactly when it was, but I remember the caseworkers indicating to us that she was starting to question her decision. We tried to sleep, which you can imagine was impossible. And the next morning, when our caseworker called and said that she was coming to the hospital to talk to us, we knew that it wasn't good news. I really don't have good words to tell you how we felt in those moments after the baby girl we thought was going to be our daughter was wheeled from our room, never to be brought back in. Though she didn't physically die, that's exactly what it felt like to us. This is not a great picture, but it's the one Dustin snapped hurriedly on his phone. This is the last picture we took that day before leaving the hospital. Somehow that picture of an empty car seat seemed to capture what had happened and how we felt inside better than almost anything else could. It was gut-wrenching. I feel like it's just hard to convey that in words, but it was the hardest thing I've ever experienced in my whole life. And in the following days, some of the darkest of my life, I found myself crying out to God in complete brokenness and anger. Now, while my story is unique to me, human suffering is not. James 1:2-4 says that we should consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Oh, how I wish there was another way to develop perseverance through your suffering. John 16:33 tells us that in this world you will have trouble. It's in these times of trouble and suffering, these storms we encounter in life, that we find ourselves at a crossroads. We can either choose to trust God through it and put our hope in Him, or we can be persuaded by the enemy that God isn't trustworthy and He isn't for our good. And that reminds me of the story of Job. I'm sorry, that's really small. I was trying to get all my references up here. Job chapter 1, verses 13 through 22 says, Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them, and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, The Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Chapter 2 goes on to say that on top of losing his children and all of his livestock, his health also suffered greatly. He was struck with sores all over his body. How miserable. Now, while I think Job's response is amazing, especially considering all that he had just been through, what I think is really interesting is Job's wife's response in chapter 2, verse 9. Then his wife said to him, Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. Now, here are 2 people who have just experienced the very same level of loss, except for the sores that are only on Job. And yet their responses at that crossroads are very different. Job and his wife found themselves at that crossroads, and they chose different paths. Job chose to remain faithful to God, saying, Blessed be the name of the Lord, while his wife, amidst the same set of circumstances, said, Curse God and die. I've heard it said, suffering can either be a catalyst to make us better or bitter. I knew that I didn't want to become bitter. I wanted to figure out how to endure my suffering more like Job, who maintained a steadfast faithfulness to God despite his circumstances. It was in these days and weeks of wrestling following our failed adoption that our perspective slowly started to shift. We realized that our hope couldn't be tied to any specific outcome here on earth. The kind of hope that doesn't put us to shame is only found in the eternal promise of heaven. Romans 5, 3 through 5 says, Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. I realized I was tying my hope to my deep desire for motherhood. And when we kept hitting roadblock after roadblock, my hope began to waver. When we tie our hope to a specific outcome in this broken world, that's what happens. Because if that thing we so desperately want doesn't come to be, we're crushed. When we instead anchor our hope squarely on the Lord, we can have confidence in our hope. Because as Hebrews 10:23 says, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. I think this quote by Rachel Marie Martin says it so well, and it's what Dustin and I realized that we needed to do. Sometimes you have to let go of the picture of what you thought life would be like and learn to find joy in the story you are actually living. And that's what we started to do. It didn't change or nullify any of the things we had experienced, but we learned to appreciate the beauty and the blessings of the life that God had already given to us. Life is not about a single destination as much as it is about the journey and the growth that comes along the way. We will always find ourselves laboring through one storm or another in this life. That's just how it's going to be. And the only way to weather those storms is to anchor ourselves to God, to ask Him to draw near to us and us near to Him, and to hold us close while we endure the wind and the waves that will no doubt come. This is the very thing Hebrews 6:19 talks about. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. While I was preparing for this lesson, I wasn't really able to find any history or story surrounding the song that I've chosen. It was written in 2001, and so it's still considered a new song. So there's just really nothing out there. But what I did come across was a podcast interview with Keith Getty. He's one of the creators of this song. Listen to some of what he had to say. Authentic worship begins with an authentic picture of the God of the Bible. He is a God who's full of compassion and a God of peace. He's a God who's rich in mercy. He's longing to forgive, and He delights in our praises. He went on to say, the songs we sing should have an honest reflection of all parts of human emotion. All parts of human emotion. Singing about things that are hard is just as important as singing about things that are happy. I love that this song is both honest about the struggle of life and at the same time hopeful in the Lord amidst the struggle. That to me makes this song relatable and comforting. We don't have to gloss over our pain or pretend it isn't there before approaching God in worship. We can be honest with Him. He delights in our praises, whether we're on a mountaintop or in a deep valley. I want to take a minute to just read the words of this song out loud. As it's been expressed many times throughout this series, there's something about just reading the words of a song without the music that really helps us to focus on what it's saying. Jesus, draw me ever nearer as I labor through the storm. You have called me to this passage, and I'll follow, though I'm worn. Jesus, guide me through the tempest, keep my spirit stayed and sure. When the midnight meets the morning, let me love you even more. Let the treasures of the trial form within me as I go, and at the end of this long passage, let me leave them at your throne. May this journey bring a blessing. May I rise on wings of faith. At the end of my heart's testing, with your likeness, let me wake. All of our journeys are different, but they all have storms and trials and challenges that we're all gonna face. Your storms are not necessarily my storms, and my storms are not necessarily your storms. But what I've found is that even in the storms, whatever they may be, God is always there. In Psalm 46:1, the psalmist says, God is our refuge and strength, and ever-present help in trouble. God has always been with us no matter what we have faced. Some of the very last words Jesus spoke on earth made that very promise. And surely I am with you always, even to the very end of the age. He is Emmanuel, which means God with us. I wanted to close by sharing a children's book with you. The teacher in me loves a good read aloud. And I often think that the simple language used in a book written for children can take hard concepts and break them down to where they're easy to understand. Near, that's what this book is called, is a book that we read to Faith almost every day. It is inspired by Psalm 139, and it is written in child-friendly language, and the message of this psalm is one that we want her to hear early and often. So I'd like to read it to you. God is my Father who made everything, and I am a little explorer of the wide world. He is near to me, and he protects me. He sees me, and he knows me. He is strong, and he looks after me. He is with me always. However far I go, He is always near me. I could climb the biggest mountain. I could fly to the highest star. I could dive into the deepest sea. I could sail far, far away, even to the North Pole. God would still be there. I could trek through jungles, ride through deserts, zoom as fast as light. God would still be there. Even in the dark at night, he is still with me there. He stays close to me, and he won't ever leave me. Because I am his little child, and he loves me. Looking back, I know that through all the highs and lows on our journey, God was always near, and especially in the dark, scary places, just like this book said. And he's always near to you too. I want to leave you with the encouragement found in Romans 15:13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit.